Sandwich all over. Good morning, everyone. Rishus Rabbi, thank you very much, Rabbi Stephen, for giving me the opportunity to come and share some words of Torah with you all this morning. I find it very, very interesting watching on the news the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months, and really we got to see history unfold before our eyes. We saw absolutely incredibly how the Assad regime in Syria essentially fell in the space of a week and a half. The regime that was ruling over 50 years seemed to be that it was undefeatable in the last decades, various attempts to overthrow the regime, and it seemed to be that it survived and it was going to be okay. And on the 27th of November, out of nowhere, the rebel forces launched a big major attack on Aleppo, and a mere 10 days later, Damascus had fallen, Assad had fled the country, had escaped, and this regime, literally in the space of 8, 9 days, had gone from being there, was ruling, it seemed to be absolutely fine, to it's gone, stubbed out the country, and the country is massively, massively changed. And what I found very interesting on the news during these 8, 9 days of all the chaos going on in Syria is the differing reactions and responses to all of Assad's inner circle and his loyalists that you saw on the news on the 27th of November. Already on that day, some of his inner circle and loyalists started fleeing the country. As soon as Aleppo got taken over, they saw the writing was on the wall and they started to escape. They started to leave the country, and you saw the footage on the news of them running over the border and escaping. Others stayed, carried on fighting, and that seemed to be a theme that continued. There was a big split. Some of them ran away, some of them tried to hang on a bit longer and then eventually escaped a little bit later when things got worse. Whilst on the other hand, some of Assad's inner circle stuck it out. They stayed even right to the end, and some even stayed afterwards and tried to launch counterattacks. And it was very, very fascinating seeing this contrast. Some of them escaping, some of them hanging around, some of them even trying to fight back. The last couple of weeks, both last week's parasha and this week's parasha, we see one of the biggest regimes in the world also collapsing. We see Paro's Egyptian empire, one of the strongest countries in the world, is also in turmoil. The plagues start coming, people start suffering, and it's also very interesting. Something I've always thought about is that we know exactly what Paro's doing. The Torah tells us, hardening his heart, doesn't let the Jewish people go. Paro's very, very steadfast in his position. He's not going to free the Jewish people. But I've always wondered, what about Paro's inner circle? What about Paro's loyalists? What are they doing during this time? Are they escaping? Are they running away? Are they hanging about? Are they staying strong in their support for Paro? And I've always wondered what's going on. So luckily for us, the Gemara in Sota on Daf Yud Aleph Omid Aleph tells us that in the same way that by Assad's regime we see this contrast: some run away, some stick about, some carry on fighting. We have that same contrast also by Paro's inner circle as well. The Gemara tells us, Omar Rav Chia Baraba, Omar Rav Simai, Shlosha Hayu Be'osa Eitza, that really there were three people. I'm sure there were three categories, and this is just three examples of the three categories. There were three different types of people who were in Paro's inner circle during this time when the plagues all started. And the Gemara tells us there were three different responses, three different reactions to the plagues, to the beginning of the demise of the Egyptian empire. We have three people: Bilam, Eov, and Yisro. We're going to break down what exactly these three categories of people did. So we'll work in reverse order. Number one, we have Yitro. He does the best thing, he responds in the best way. As soon as he sees the writing on the wall, the empire's crumbling, the plagues are falling down, immediately Yitro gets up and he runs away. He flees, he gets out of there quickly as he possibly can. Yitro Shabarach, he gets out of there, he stops advising Paro, jumps the ship, and as a result, Zachim Mibne Badam Shiyashvu Belishkas Agazes. And as a result, he merits to have incredible children who sit in the chamber of hewn stone. And as we know, he becomes a very, very prominent person. There's a whole parasha named after him, and he ends up having a very, very good life. That's number one. Number two, we have Eov, we have Job, and he doesn't have the conviction to run away. He's too scared to escape and flee, but he stays quiet. He stops being so strong in his support. He sort of draws back his support for Paro a little bit, and as a result, he ends up having lots of Yisur and he suffers a lot. Doesn't have the amazing rewards that Yitro has, but he ends up having lots of afflictions. And finally, and that's going to be the focus of today's share, we have Bilam. Bilam reacts the same guy who in a couple of months' time is hitting donkeys and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. The same Bilam is an advisor to Paro. And when everything kicks off, he ends up being incredibly loyal and incredibly strong in his support for Paro, doesn't run away, he doesn't stay silent, and he ends up being incredibly strong in what he does. So much so in the end of last week's parasha, the seventh plague comes down, hail. And Moshe comes out and says to everyone, heads up, there's going to be hail that's going to come down tomorrow morning. And it's not going to be regular hailstones, it's going to be fire. And everything that's outside is going to be destroyed. All of your produce, all of your cattle, everything's going to be totally obliterated. So I'm giving you a warning. You should, everything that's outside, bring it inside overnight and make sure that you don't lose your livelihood. And the Medrash tells us that Bilam decides to not listen to Moshe. He leaves everything outside, and everything that Bilam has gets destroyed. All of his animals, all of his crops, everything gets destroyed. And the obvious question is Bilam stupid? You know, even if he's loyal to Paro and he wants to be strong in his support to Paro, it's happened 6 times. 6 times these plagues have been pre-warned and it's come down and it's happened. And as far as we know, Bilam's heart not being hardened, he's just so strong in his support that even if he still supports Paro, just take the precaution. Why risk losing all your animals? Why risk losing absolutely everything that you have? Why did he seemingly be so stupid? Leaving everything outside, everything gets totally destroyed. He loses absolutely everything. And the question I want to look at in the next few minutes is Bilam stupid? What's he playing at? Why is he so strong in his support for Paro that he can't appreciate perhaps that he might be making a massive mistake? You know, in the same way that people saw that Assad's regime is falling and they got out of there. Why didn't he see the writing on the wall? So my cousin, Rabbi Louis Herzsaft, sent me over an unbelievable story that he heard in a share by Rabbi Fishel Schachter. Unbelievable story. It was Erev Pesach, and he had several kids. I think he had 9 or 10 kids. And Erev Pesach, you know, the chaos, everything's all very crazy and busy. And the wife said to the rabbi, I need 4 hours where you just get the kids out of the house. I need to get the house sorted. I don't care where you take them. You can go walk around the block for 4 hours. Just get them out of the house. So he loads them into the van and he's trying to work out what to do with these 10 kids for a couple of hours. And, you know, if you're going anywhere with 9 or 10 kids, it's very expensive. You know, even to just go to the zoo, you're looking at hundreds of pounds remortgaging the house. So he's trying to work out what's he going to do. So he gets them in the van and decides that, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the airport. And we're going to go to the airport and look at all the planes. And the kids here, this is the plan. And you know, they're moaning in the car, huffing and puffing. That's so boring. I don't want to go look at aeroplanes. He said, you know what? Let's just get to the airport, see how it goes. If we're bored, we'll leave after a couple of minutes. They get to the airport, and the kids start having an amazing time. You know, they don't really go on family holidays. I'm sure you can understand for obvious reasons why. And for them to see the airplanes going up and down is really exciting, and they're really enjoying themselves. And as they're about to leave, an hour and a half into being in the airport, the rabbi discovers there's a minibus which goes all the way around the airport. And he's really excited. That's going to buy another hour of fun. And the kids get onto the bus and they're going on this minibus around the airport, having the most unbelievable time looking at all the planes. And after about half an hour on this minibus, a gentleman walks onto the bus wearing a nice fancy pilot hat. And straight away, one of the kids stands up to let the guy sit down. And the pilot says, I've been actually sitting down for the last 16 hours. You know, I'm very happy standing up. And they start having a conversation, the pilot and the father. And the pilot says, where are you guys off to? And he sort of tries to shrug off the question, give a sort of, you know, vague answer. And then he says, you know, what terminal are you going to? I can help you. Tell me where you're going and I can tell you instructions. And he realizes that sort of the gig is up here. He can't keep this up. He needs to come clean. He's actually going nowhere. He's just going around in circles on this bus. And he says to the guy, you know, I'll be honest with you, we're actually going nowhere. We're just going around in circles to look at the aeroplanes. And the pilot looks at this rabbi for a minute and starts to open up about, what he's been through in the last 10, 15 years. And he says to the rabbi, I'll be honest with you, when I first became a pilot, I did it to give my wife and my kids a better life. I thought that if I be a pilot, then financially we'll be okay. I'll be able to support them, give them the best life possible. So I put absolutely everything, all of my efforts into pilot school and to be a pilot. And what happened was, as I advanced pilot school, I realized I was actually very, very gifted. And I went from being a short distance pilot to a long haul pilot, which ultimately meant that 3 out of every 4 weeks, I'd be in far flung places, I'd be away from my family. And ultimately, my wife couldn't cope with being on her own for such a long time. And she left me and took the kids away from me. And even though my pilot career has become unbelievable, 20 years of being the most unbelievable pilot, ultimately it's landed me up with lots of money, but absolutely nothing. I don't see my kids. My wife's left me. And it's basically ruined my entire life. It's an incredible conversation going on this minibus in the airport. And he looks at the rabbi and he says, I look at you, and even though you're flying nowhere, you're actually going everywhere. Me, I fly all over the world. I can tell you every minute where I'm going. I have an exact schedule. I'm flying absolutely everywhere, but I'm going absolutely nowhere. Explains Rabbi Franz, what's going on with Bilam? How could he be so stupid? And he explains that Bilam, his whole thought in his head was that I want to give my family the best possible life. And the way that I'm going to get there is by being Paro's chief advisor. If I could be the chief advisor, if I could be the main man, a man of prominence, a man of power, that's my ticket. And that is how he saw his way to a good life. And therefore, he saw the empire was crumbling, everything was falling apart, the plagues were coming. But he couldn't look beyond that. He couldn't see beyond. In his head, he has to support the empire because that was his ticket to a good life. And even though everything's falling apart, he just could not see beyond that. He was so fixated on being a pilot, on that's his ticket to an amazing life, that he didn't actually understand. He didn't really realize that actually he has to jump ship. That Syria's falling, the kingdom's falling. He has to escape. There's gonna be nothing left. He couldn't see beyond that. And really, that actually is the essence of Bilam, Asher lo sam libo. He didn't pay attention to the wider context. He couldn't stop to think for a minute. He couldn't stop to understand that really this plan of his wasn't actually working out. And really, he was heading towards losing his livelihood. He was heading towards these hailstones, destroying absolutely everything. And really, this actually follows Bilam his whole life. Unfortunately for him, this basically continues all the way through. Now we see in Parashat Balak, he's on his way to curse the Jewish people. Again, he'd obviously realized by that point the Egyptian plan isn't working out so well. So his next plan is he'll be a world-class curser, he'll be an amazing prophet. And he has a job to do. He's going to go and curse the Jewish people, and that's his ticket to an amazing life. And there's a donkey telling him, don't do it. The donkey's on his way. You've got a donkey telling you, think for a second, open your eyes, it's not working. You have to change the course of action. Being a pilot isn't helping you. Your wife's about to leave you. And he couldn't understand this. And I remember very, very well when I started my job in Welling, there was a incredibly holy guy called Chaim who would come and do the lading for us. And it was an unbelievable way to ease me into the job, having someone to take that burden off me. And he was an incredible, incredible Barkora. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately, he made Aliyah a few weeks ago, unfortunately for me. And I remember the first message me say that he's not going to be around the Shabbos, it's going to be Parashat Balak. So I thought, okay, I'll do the lading, it should be okay, I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. And I remember learning it in the Chumash, and I get to Shabbat morning, and I open up the Torah, and all I see is this. What do you guys notice about this clump of Torah? Does anything you guys notice? Thankfully, it was a bit bigger. Correct. There was no paragraphs, and the Chofetz Chaim explains. Actually, it's incredibly. You can see on Zoom. There's no paragraphs. It's all one big clump of text. And I opened up and just saw this massive clump of text. It was very overwhelming. And the Chofetz Chaim explains that it's actually not a coincidence. He explains that when Moshe Rabbeinu was writing the Torah, what he would do is he would write a little section and then leave a little small break in between the sections. And the whole point of the section was for both Moshe at the time and also us reading back to just sort of take stock about what we've just read, to try and internalize it, think about what's just been said before moving on to something else. And it's a chance to just take a minute to think and consider about what's being said at that point. And the Chofetz Chaim explains that actually it's very, very intentional. Because as we've seen, Bilam, his whole life is plagued by this issue of not stopping and thinking. He's always on the move. He's so has such tunnel vision for what he's trying to accomplish, whether it's being Paro's advisor, whether it's going to curse the Jewish people, that he doesn't stop for a second. And the Chofetz Chaim is telling us that really Moshe is giving us a lesson. He's not just trying to make me feel overwhelmed, opening up the Torah and seeing the text about Tulane. That when you see such a massive clump of text showing us that Bilam was just zoom, 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 zoom. He didn't stop for a second to think about what actually am I doing? I'm going to do this job, and there's a donkey talking to me, and I'm so fixated on what I'm trying to do that he can't even stop to think about that. Finally, there's a very interesting Gemara in Maseches Brachos, which says a person should not take something called a Pesia Gasa. You shouldn't take a very long stride. And the Gemara explains that if a person takes a very long stride, almost like sort of running, taking very, very quick, very, very long strides, it diminishes a person's eyesight by 1/500th. That taking long strides negatively impacts our eyesight. And the Gemara says, my takante. How do you fix this? A person takes big strides, he's into lunging, and he realizes he learns the Gemara. What can a person do to fix their eyesight? And the Gemara gives a very interesting answer. The Gemara says, Lahadre Kedusha de Shimshe. You can restore it by doing Kiddush, and later on explains by doing Havdalah. Seems like a very strange Kabbalistic Gemara. Take long strides, ruins your eyesight, and do Kiddush and you do Havdalah, and that fixes it. Rabbi Zev Leff wants to explain that really this is allegorical. He says taking very, very big strides represents moving in a way where one isn't thinking. You're sort of lunging quickly, you're not thinking about where a person's going, acting sort of in haste without first having the proper thought. And he explains that that can affect your vision, it can affect your eyesight. In the same way Bilam's eyesight was affected, he couldn't see that Egypt was falling, he was seeing a talking donkey. And by not thinking and taking these big strides, it affects our perspective. It affects our ability to see what's happening around us. And the Gemara says, therefore, how can we fix it? We fix it by doing Kiddush and Havdalah. Because the whole essence of Kiddush and Havdalah is about distinction, that Mekadesh Shabbos, we're making a distinction between Friday afternoon and Shabbat, that one is weekday, one Shabbat. There's a difference. Something changes. We're not just going from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Really, the actual day is changing. And similarly, by Havdalah as well, it's the same idea. We're going from Kodesh to Chol, that the air we're breathing in on Shabbat is different to after Shabbat. The difference between Yisroel and Amim, and there's a difference that really distinction actually exists. And that's really our message. And I think we can learn a tremendous amount from Bilam, his mistakes. We look at Yitro. As soon as the first city in Syria fell, as soon as Homs fell, you get out straight away. As soon as you realize that the pilot school isn't actually working, it's not giving you what you're intending it to be. You need to reassess rather than sticking with the plan. Tremendous lesson, the bracha. We should all be not like Bilam. We should all be like Yitro. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Very good. Thanks a lot. Okay. I will say goodbye to those on Zoom, and then we'll finish off the proceedings. So.